Hey everyone, Erick Stakelbeck here. Today on the Newscast, another major explosion rocks Lebanon. Could it be linked to Hezbollah? Plus, the Iranian regime is reportedly seeking to assassinate U.S. officials. They're still none too happy about the death of their terror master, Qassem Soleimani. Get all the breaking details coming up. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. As I mentioned in the lead-in, just a few hours ago we had another major explosion that rocked Lebanon. This time it was in the southern half of the country, and folks, you know what that means. Southern Lebanon, just north of Israel, is Hezbollah country. We've got those breaking details for you coming up. Also, all the emerging details around this reported Iranian plot to assassinate the U.S. ambassador to South Africa as retribution for the death of Iranian terror master Qassem Soleimani. Folks, we're going to get into it in a minute. Before I do, I just want to encourage you to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube, and be sure to click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We are bringing you the kind of cutting-edge, timely information that you just won't hear anywhere else. Certainly not in the mainstream media, and we've got another story for you today in particular that I think fits that bill, involving Hezbollah and ammonium nitrate. More on that in a second. Up first, speaking of Hezbollah, in Ain Qana, a mountainous region, a town in a mountainous region of southern Lebanon, earlier today, we had a massive blast. According to reports coming out of Lebanon, the Lebanese army apparently has shut the town off. The details coming out right now are pretty scant, but according to reports on the ground in the Middle East and what observers are saying, there are a lot of suspicions, to say the least, that this was a Hezbollah weapons depot that went up in flames. We don't have any information yet about deaths or casualties, injuries, but it looks like this was Hezbollah once again playing with some very deadly and dangerous matches, or fire, so to speak. And this comes on the heels, right? Just a month and a half ago, the August 3rd Beirut blast, which captured world headlines. Scores of people killed, left homeless, entire neighborhoods in Beirut destroyed. And that massive explosion, it looked almost like a mushroom cloud. Obviously, there were some very heavy explosive substances there at the port of Beirut, the Lebanese capital. And surprise, surprise, Hezbollah controls that Beirut port. And now we have Hezbollah once again. Who knows? We may never get the full picture of what happened on August 3rd and the full scale of Hezbollah's involvement. But again, we do know they control that port. They know what's coming in. They know what's going out. They knew of that large ammonium nitrate stockpile that had been sitting there at the Beirut port. And folks, I believe Hezbollah intended to use it in terror attacks. I'll tell you why in just a minute. But hey, when there is an explosion in Lebanon, obviously, things going up in flames, everyone is going to look at Hezbollah, in particular in southern Lebanon, which is Hezbollah's base. That's where they live and breathe. So we will bring you more details about this blast at Ain Qana as they emerge, but apparently it was a major one. We had clouds of smoke billowing up into the sky. Who knows what Hezbollah is experimenting with? Some very deadly materials. We've told you many times here on the Newscast, they are attempting to acquire precision-guided munitions from the Iranian regime. In terms of ammonium nitrate, I mentioned this a minute ago, a story that the mainstream media is completely ignoring. Here's one for you. We've told you on previous newscasts why we are very suspicious over the August 3rd Beirut blast and Hezbollah's involvement in it. Because, folks, there is a track record of Hezbollah using and working with ammonium nitrate. Hezbollah authorities in London found a Hezbollah ammonium nitrate stockpile. Authorities in Germany, in southern Germany in particular, over the past few years, found a Hezbollah ammonium nitrate stockpile. And also in the island nation of Cyprus. So there is obviously a track record of Hezbollah using, or at least stockpiling, ammonium nitrate, in particular in Europe. And I'm holding my phone because now we have some new details. I want to read to you verbatim. Top U.S. official from the State Department said just a few days ago that His name is Nathan Sales. He is the State Department's top counterterrorism official. He said just a few days ago that Hezbollah had transported ammonium nitrate caches via Belgium into France, Spain, Italy, Switzerland, and Greece. They're stockpiling and storing ammonium nitrate, is Hezbollah, throughout Western Europe. Nathan Sales, the top counterterrorism official for the U.S. State Department, went on to say, since 2012, and I'm quoting him directly here, since 2012, Hezbollah has established caches of ammonium nitrate throughout Europe by transporting first aid kits whose cold packs contain the substance. They're doing it in a very subtle, sneaky way, not surprising there. He went on to say, I can also reveal that significant ammonium nitrate caches have been discovered or destroyed by France, Greece, and Italy. We have reason to believe that this activity is still underway. Ammonium nitrate caches are still suspected throughout Europe, in particular in Greece, Italy, and Spain. Again, that's Nathan Sales, the U.S. State Department's top counterterrorism official. And what we have is basically an epidemic of Hezbollah, the world's deadliest terror organization, sponsored by, funded by, supported by the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism in terms of a nation state, and that is the Iranian regime. We have Hezbollah, basically an epidemic. Again, I'll use that word, folks. Storing ammonium nitrate, this highly flammable, deadly, explosive substance that has gone into terror attack after terror attack and been used. They're stockpiling it, or attempting to, throughout Western Europe. And this is not a story? Is this the first time you've heard it? Please leave comments. We love to read your comments here on the news channel. Please leave me your comments below, because I have a sneaking suspicion that this major news story that affects all of us has not been reported in your local paper, and certainly not on the national level at the likes of the New York Times. And if it was, I might have missed it, but it was probably on page 32B of the New York Times. But please let me know in the comments. I'm just curious to know if you knew about this story of Hezbollah stockpiling ammonium nitrate, according to a top United States official, throughout Western Europe. And now we have another blast in the past few hours rocking Lebanon once again. Folks, number one, I feel nothing but sadness and empathy for the people in Lebanon who are under the yoke of this brutal, wicked Hezbollah rule there in southern Lebanon in particular, who have borne the brunt of Hezbollah's nefarious activities in Beirut and elsewhere. The Iranian regime obviously has its hand on that nation, so pray for the people of Lebanon. That's number one. But number two, look, Hezbollah is obviously gearing up for something. That's my view, and we've been talking about this obviously on the newscast. Go into our archives. You can read more about it right here on YouTube. We've been talking about this coming Great Northern War where Israel will be facing off with Hezbollah and the Iranian regime and their various radical allies in Syria and Lebanon in a day that I don't believe is too far off. It's a question not of if, but when. And that's not just me saying it. That's Israeli officials saying that. So that conflict is coming. So it's no surprise that Hezbollah is stockpiling ammonium nitrate. But pretty bold, I would say, for them to do it in Western Europe, which is really hostile territory by and large. Hostile, at least on the surface. Obviously, European nations are democracies, but they've looked the other way many times over the past few decades in terms of radical Islamic and terror activity on their soil, in particular, Iranian and Hezbollah-linked activity on European soil. Now, we reported here in the newscast a short time ago that Germany banned Hezbollah in the spring of 2020, a very positive move. Now the United States, the Trump administration, wants the entire European Union. They want the EU centered in Brussels to ban Hezbollah outright, because we have this interesting little situation where Europe says, look, we oppose Hezbollah's military wing, but they've also got a political and social wing, and they're legitimate, and we want to engage with them. No. Terror is terror. That's like saying the Gestapo under the Nazi regime, hey, we can deal with them. They're more involved in politics and social issues, or the brown shirts. No. Terror is terror. Hezbollah is a vicious, bloodthirsty terror organization. I do not say that lightly. It should be banned in Europe outright. And that's why this top U.S. counterterrorism official gave these comments, gave this speech a few days ago saying, hey, Europe, wake up call. Hezbollah has its tentacles throughout your continent, not just in the Middle East. So a big wake up call. Speaking of wake up calls, the Trump administration gave the Iranian regime yet another wake-up call this week. The Trump administration announced on Sunday, September 20th, that it was enforcing new sanctions against the Iranian regime, particularly targeting Iran's Ministry of Defense. Now, they continue to just squeeze the Iranian regime. It's very refreshing to see as an American because under the previous administration, that was anything but the case. It was appeasement as the order of the day, personified by the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. No need to rehash all of that again, but know this, the Trump administration continues to tighten its grip and continues to push the Iranian regime against the wall. And folks, that's a good thing. The pressure continued, unrelenting, I would say, pressure is a good thing. Now, we know the Iranian regime is going to lash out. More on that in a second. But you gotta keep the heat on. History shows again and again, and we've talked about it many times here in the newscast, appeasement does not work. So this is the right course of action against the Iranian regime, to squeeze them, to pressure them, and not surprisingly, to show you where they are coming from. The top diplomat in Iran, Javad Zarif, is already breathing threats against the United States as these sanctions are enforced, new sanctions, and he's bringing up Qassem Soleimani. Remember him, the not so dearly departed terror master who was taken out at the beginning of this year by U.S. forces in a U.S. airstrike. Zarif is saying and threatening to the U.S. in the same breath as he's saying the sanctions are evil and everything else. He's threatening retaliation still over the death of Qassem Soleimani. Very interesting. So the Iranian regime clearly has not let this go. And again, Zarif, this is a guy who was wined and dined by John Kerry, the previous U.S. Secretary of State, and by European diplomats, yet he's breathing threats of terror against the United States. Gives you an idea of kind of the moral bankruptcy in many of our Western capitals. But in terms of the retaliation over Soleimani's death that Zarif has mentioned, that the other supposed great moderate, the great moderate hope of the Iranian regime, the President Hassan Rouhani, has also threatened retaliation for Soleimani. Both Zarif and Rouhani, who again are welcome in Western capitals and treated as honored guests and very moderate, so they say, so they try to portray. Rouhani has also threatened retaliation, but we saw this in real time just last week, reported, or at least attempted apparently in real time, or being discussed by the Iranian regime, threats that they were looking, and they've been looking to do this perhaps for several months, to assassinate a U.S. official, and they have zeroed in on the U.S. ambassador to South Africa. Now, I don't know if they thought that would be a softer target, but there are reports that the Iranian regime, wanting retribution for Soleimani's death, continue to look at U.S. targets and U.S. officials to assassinate, and the ambassador to South Africa is apparently on the top of their hit list. Thankfully, President Trump said, and I think I'm quoting here directly, or at least I'm paraphrasing very closely to what he said, if you dare do something like that, we will hit you 1,000 times harder. End of quote. And that's exactly the response that the Iranian regime needs to hear to make them think twice. Hey, the death of Qassem Soleimani, folks, threw them for a complete loop. They never, ever thought this would happen. Before his death, Soleimani was kind of parading around the Middle East, whether it was Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, clear out there in the open, very confident, brimming with confidence, and walking around in plain sight. And then he was taken out. And the Iranian regime never thought it would happen. So now when President Trump says something like this, hey, we will hit you 1,000 times harder, don't even think about it. The bad guys, in particular the mullahs in Tehran, have to think twice. And again, very, very refreshing after what we saw in the previous administration. I'm speaking there as an American. Last item of business here, or last item of news we need to get into as we give you this Middle East roundup today here on the Watchman Newscast. Speaking of Iran and assassinations, the Iranian regime is not very happy about these peace deals between Israel and its Sunni Arab neighbors. In particular, obviously last week I was at the White House. Last Tuesday, hard to believe it's already been a week, but I was there on the South Lawn for the signing between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Israel and Bahrain. Hey, the big losers, as Israel and the Sunni Arab nations get closer together and make peace, the big losers are the Iranian regime, the Iranian axis, Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Assad regime, and also Turkey, which has gone radical under the Islamist tyrant Recep Erdogan. Now, that means the Iranian axis and the Muslim Brotherhood, global Muslim Brotherhood movement, which is best personified today by Erdogan, are the big losers here. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, because a lot of people in the comments are questioning these deals. I think they're a good thing. You can tell a lot about them by the people who are opposing them, and the loudest voices against Israel getting closer to its Sunni Arab neighbors are the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, and Erdogan. So I think that's very telling. But in the wake of Bahrain normalizing relations with Israel, we have reports, again, the mainstream media, scant coverage, surprise, surprise, another major story, you would think, the Iranian regime apparently plotting terror in Bahrain. Remember, Bahrain is a tiny island nation in the Persian Gulf off the coast of Saudi Arabia, just across the Gulf from Iran. And apparently Iranian-backed terrorists in Bahrain, a plot was uncovered. They were arrested. There were explosives and weapons involved, but apparently, reportedly, I should say, looking to perhaps assassinate some foreign diplomats, maybe a Bahraini official, God forbid, but that's what Bahraini officials are saying. We rolled up this terror plot that the Iranian regime was behind. And folks, remember, the U.S. Fifth Fleet, the Fifth Fleet of the U.S. Navy, is stationed in Bahrain. So how this didn't garner more major media coverage, I have no idea, but that's what we are here for on the Watchman News channel. So be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. Once again, we will continue to bring you these breaking updates that you need to know. I think you'd rather know than not know. And we like to say it here on the news channel. We like to quote God speaking through the prophet Amos, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." You can't say you don't have the knowledge and the information when you visit us here on the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube. So, thanks for tuning in today. Until Thursday, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.